Okay, so in this video, we're gonna be talking about plants in the Hawaiian environment and learning some of the terminology that we use to when we talk about these plants. So we talked about this in lab, but I want to cover this again in case you still have any questions. So when we're talking about native plants, we're talking about plants that are found in Hawaii naturally, without the help of human beings. So native plants can be divided into two major groups, endemic and indigenous. Endemic plants are found only in Hawaii. 90% of Hawaiian plants are actually endemic, so it's quite an amazing thing to have so many species that are only found here. Another group of plants that fall into the native category are indigenous plants. So indigenous plants are found in Hawaii, but also someplace else. So they can be native here, and they can also be native in other parts of the Pacific, for example. When we're talking about introduced plants, these are plants that got introduced here by humans. So Polynesian plants are brought in the canoes by Polynesians, so sometimes they're called canoe plants. And recent introductions are brought to Hawaii since 1778, so since Captain Cook arrived in the island. And there are thousands of new species of recent introductions. And most species that we eat today are actually recent introductions, unless you're making a huge effort to eat only canoe plants. So Polynesian plants were brought to Hawaii by Polynesians, and there are only 26 species of those plants. Okay, so why should we learn about native plants? When we're talking about native plants, it's, a lot of plants are endangered and they provide lots of environmental benefits, such as ohia lehua in the forest. They attract rain. Some of these plants filter the water that we drink. They're an important part of Hawaiian culture. Native plants have scientific value and they're rapidly disappearing. So here's a picture of Malhauhele, an endangered plant that is the state flower. Okay, so a few pictures here of indigenous plants. So lots of indigenous plants are found in the beach area where close to the ocean, and the reason for that is that sometimes some of the fruits or seeds they float in oceanic currents, so it can be dispersed from here to other islands. So these plants are native here, but also from someplace else. And in the case of Haleakala sandalwood, for example, that's an endemic species. They're only found here in Hawaii. Okay, so Polynesian introductions, there are about 26 species, and I'll show you a couple pictures. So there's ape, ohe, or the bamboo that is used for musical instruments such as the nose flute. There's pia, and people use pia to make haupia. That's not the case anymore. Haupia is made with different ingredients, but they used to take the tubers of this plant and grind it up, and it makes it into like a starchy substance. So then you mix it up with coconut and you get haupia. So there's also ava, so people drink ava. That's also a canoe plant. Shampoo ginger, you can squeeze the flowers and it has this liquidy substance that you can use to wash your hair. Kukui nut or candle nut. This is an important species because the oils of the nut is used to make fire. And there are hau flowers, and of course kalo and wala or sweet potato are also canoe plants were introduced by Polynesians. So recent introduction. Like I said before, there are thousands of species. But some of these species actually they were introduced here, they became naturalized, so they became invasive. So what happens is that they arrived in the islands and they found perfect environments and they started reproducing. And when they started reproducing, they started taking over areas where native plants inhabit. So some of these plants can be a major issue, like the yellow ginger is one of them. Scarlet fruited gourd is a horrible invasive species, and so is this coaster's curse. they really displace native plants, and it's just awful. So they're also called aliens or weeds, but these plants can really make a huge impact in the environment. Other plants like this hanging ginger or this anthurium, they are introduced species, but they may not be invasive species. So they may be growing, but they not be taking over areas where native plants are. So it depends on the plant. Not all recent introductions are actually invasive plants. Okay, so some of the terminology you should get to know. What is a native plant? What is an introduced plant? Is it Polynesian introduction? Is it a recent introduction? Is it a naturalized species? So naturalized species are introduced plants that became established. And another thing you should know is what is the word flora. So flora has two meanings. One is that it can refer to all plants in a region, like if I'm saying, oh, the flora of Hawaii, I just mean the plants of Hawaii. But it may also refer to a reference book. For example, a Flora of Hawaii would list and give descriptions of all native and naturalized plants on that region. So it's super handy to have a book like that, because if you are in the field and you're hiking and you're looking at a plant that you don't know, if you have a flora with you, it's quite easy to, if you have training, to find that species. Some floras are really heavy, so you sometimes don't want to take that out, so you would take instead a field guide that has fewer species.